good.
But
All
if you
yours.
really want to go to it, go to the Seattle Art Museum, which is where I live. Okay, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an ethicist. But I will be raising some hard choices to make. But they won't, and there will be ethical issues here, but I'm not going to do what the former two speakers did and sort of raise those as explicitly. Let me start by telling you about one of my heroes. Her name was Frances Perkins. I can now do the thing. How many of you have heard of Frances Perkins? JJ, if you hadn't, I mean. Good. Okay, a couple of you. Frances Perkins was the first woman to be in the U.S. Cabinet. She was the Secretary of Labor under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But a really formative experience happened to her in 1911 when she was walking down near Washington Square in New York City, close to a building that's now part of NYU, but at that time was a tenement, was a sweatshop. And the sweatshop was on fire. And young women, young immigrant women, were throwing themselves out of the building because the doors had been locked so that they couldn't take breaks and therefore couldn't exit. And there was no real other way to get down. The fire exits were broken. So this was a terrible disaster. Going in the wrong direction. Next. She was in front of what was called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. And this was a huge fire, a major disaster. 150 people perished, almost all of them young immigrant women. But Frances Perkins was ready. She wasn't ready to experience this terrible disaster, but she was ready for such a disaster. It was predictable that one of these sweatshops would eventually burn and kill the people, some of the people in it. These were terrible conditions, and she knew about these conditions. And she was ready in the sense that she was working with a group of labor unions, a group of what we would now call NGOs, and some legislators, including somebody named Robert Wagner Sr., who was in the state legislature at the time in New York, and who later became Senator Robert Wagner Sr., and helped create the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act. And she was ready because they had already been working on legislation and policy to deal with occupational health and safety and other protections for workers. So when this terrible, terrible disaster happened, Frances Perkins and her collaborators, her colleagues, were able to bring up legislation and get it passed in the light of this moment. So what I want to tell you tonight is that we really, I keep hitting the wrong one, that we really have to have some hard choices about what's confronting us in the world of work, in the world generally. Now, I know a lot of you think that this talk is going to be, is AI going to get rid of our jobs, or is AI going to create more jobs? I have an answer to that. I don't know. I don't know what the balance is going to be, and nobody else does too. I've read lots and lots on this. And there's a real debate. The people who say, look at the Industrial Revolution, yes, lots of people lost their jobs, but then all kinds of new jobs would be created. Other people saying this isn't like the Industrial Revolution at all, it's a whole new era, the jobs are going to just disappear. I don't know the answer to that question. But what I do know is true, is that there's going to be a huge, huge amount of disruption, and we're already beginning to experience it. That there are lots of jobs that are going to be lost, as well as jobs that are going to be gained. I also know that there will always be work as long as there are things to do. My friend Tim O'Reilly, who some of you probably know of, has said that, and I think he's absolutely right. And there are lots of things to do. But the question is, will there be jobs? There will always be work, but will there be jobs? Will there be jobs in the sense that will there be compensated work? And even more importantly to me, and I guess this is one of the ethical questions, will that work, will those jobs come with some meaning, come with respect? Will they give people dignity, as well as some form of compensation? I think I have to turn it this way. I'm used to them going the other way. Okay, if some jobs, of course, will be lost, and some will remain necessary, but the really big question is, what do we do for those who are going to be out of work, even if it's out of work for some of the time, and I'll come back to that. But here, just think about some of these jobs. Some of these jobs that have been or will be automated. So telemarketers, we were really glad to see the end of telemarketers, but what did we get in their place? We got robocalls, right? So some of these jobs that are replaced are not replaced in ways that actually make anybody better off. Taxi drivers are clearly fearful about losing their jobs at some point, not just to Uber and Lyft drivers, but also to autonomous vehicles. There are other jobs that are going to be safe from automation, at least for some time. I see an occupational therapist regularly, not because of scary students frightened me off my bike, but because I fell off my bike all by myself and fractured my elbow. I'm very grateful occupational therapists are still around. People will need mental health counselors. At least for a while, we'll need actual surgeons and not just robots doing that work. So part of the answer is going to be to create new jobs. And I'm worried that that won't be sufficient. But here are some of the jobs that are likely to develop, some of which have already begun to develop in the near future. Genetic counselors are clearly, we just heard a story about that. One of the jobs, I've spent a lot of time working with and studying longshore workers, the dock workers, the people who work in the ports. And many of them were replaced in the 1950s by the introduction of containerization. And then some of them came back as we, really with the Walmartization of society and a lot more traffic going through the ports, and they're disappearing again as automation again begins to take over more and more of those jobs. But that doesn't mean that the ports are devoid of people. They're devoid of dock workers, as we've traditionally known them, but they're full of repair people taking care of those broken containers that are the machines, the cranes that are supposed to lift the containers. So there will be jobs in the future. And there will be some of the old jobs will be retained. And a lot of that is work that has been undervalued, and that's part of the argument I want to make tonight, is that when we think about these jobs, when we think about educators, about care providers, didn't mean to make it look so electric, but maybe that's good. Green industries. Those are things we're going to need work in. I hope we need work in green industries. We're going to need lots of teachers of all kinds. We're going to need teachers in the traditional sense, and we're going to need people who are going to retrain people as jobs change, as work changes. We're all going to be old. We're all going to, all of us have been young at some point. Everybody will get sick at some point. Care providers are going to be crucial. Sometimes working with machines, sometimes working individually, but we will need people who are providing care. But this is work, educators and care providers, that we have totally undervalued. We've underpaid. We've not given them the dignity or the compensation that they deserve. We'll always need creatives, and they don't have to be the Hollywood stars or the big pop stars. We need people who can act in plays, who can sing us songs, who can write us stories, who can do a whole variety, paint us paintings, who can do a whole variety of things. And I like to think that we'll create a new civilian conservation corps, rebuild our infrastructure, rebuild the things that we need. Okay. But as I said, we have hard choices to make. If we don't act, if we don't intervene, the rich will get richer. The middle class, which is already disappearing, will totally disappear. If we do act, and inequities that we're already seeing will just increase. If we do act, we can make sure that we have a decent society. Maybe we can own our own data. Maybe we can find forms of social insurance and social protections that will help people smooth out those transformations in their life. But to do that, we need what some of us at the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences are calling a new moral political economy. A new framework for thinking about the reciprocal obligations among government, citizens, consumers, corporations, churches, NGOs, all of the parts of society. A framework for governing us, for governance. Not necessarily all about coercion, but about what the rules of the game are. We need a new set of rules of the game. What we're operating with now is an old set of rules, an old moral political economy, one that was created by these people. The young among you might not recognize them. Some of us, a lot of us, I think, do. So Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and President Ronald Reagan in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, with their favorite economists, people like Milton Friedman and von Hayek, created a framework for how we operate today. And it was their values and their assumptions about people that really informed that political economy. They believed, or operated on the belief, on the assumption, that individuals are narrowly self-interested, and that's the main motivation for what they do. That they have perfect rationality. That our decisions can be made in the optimal way. We're still having trouble getting algorithms to do that. Imagine the human brain doing that. And that markets are the solution to all problems. Those were their presumptions, those were their beliefs. We need new ideas now. We need new intellectual leadership that's informed by actually how the world works. I'm laughing because I think about the world right now and who's leading it, and that's a big step to take. What I don't want is for Pepper to be the next big thinker. And I don't mean my friend Pepper Schwartz, who JJ may know, Sherman might know. But I mean this robot or some more sophisticated version of Pepper. We don't want the Peppers to be making the decisions for us. We need to make those decisions. And we've already made some progress on some pieces of how to create this new moral, political, economic framework. There's been a lot of science that's occurred since the 1970s. I'm going to just name 3 Nobel Prize winners in economics here, among others who have made some real advances in how we think about how humans actually operate and what humans are actually like. So Richard Thaler and Danny Kahneman have proved something I think we all already knew, but they've shown the science behind it. We're imperfect decision makers. Our rationality is imperfect. And emotions come in, and bad heuristics come in, and all kinds of preconceived notions come in. And so we have to build institutions and build our framework based on an understanding of how people actually reason, think, and act. My mentor and friend Eleanor Ostrom, now deceased unfortunately, made us remember that humans are social and creative beings who build communities and who find solutions collectively to their problems. We're not just narrowly individualistic. We're not just narrowly selfish. We're only concerned about our families. But in fact, in many instances and under many kinds of institutional arrangements and frameworks, we become social beings. Okay. Now, change of the kind that I'm talking about requires action, and it also requires real aspirational thinking. So I'm challenging you tonight to get enthusiastic and start thinking about how to do that. And some things are real obvious to do. We need to demand and vote for governments that serve us better. We need to create a social infrastructure that's a better social infrastructure than what we have now, which is almost none at all, or is only based on things like Facebook. We need a social infrastructure that links diverse communities and peoples. We need to promote a value structure that elevates both the need for survival and the need for dignity. And we need to develop models and arguments for who pays for the public goods that we want, and then advocate for the ones we prefer. So who's going to pay for all this? What we're talking about is a new social insurance system where we want a world where people can have dignity and meaning as they work, grow old, be young, change, be sick, be creative. So who will pay? Well, one possibility is to have the robots pay. This is a cover of the New Yorker magazine that suggested that. Another is we soak the rich, right? A Robin Hood version for some, a soak the rich version for others. We really need to come up with new and transformative ideas, though. I don't think either of those are quite the solution we're looking for. And as I said, we're trying at the center to generate a new moral political economy by bringing together large numbers of people from multiple disciplines and sectors to really begin to think about what's involved in doing this. And that means bringing in values as well as bringing in economics and really recognizing what kinds of values we want to promote in a society and making that an incredibly and important part of our strategy. When I think about this, I think about good government as it's portrayed on that 14th century mural on the Siena City Hall, which some of you at least, I'm sure you've seen, Piero. It's a wonderful image of a decent society. It's a city, a walled city, but the gates are open. People are dancing outside the walls, things are growing, markets are very active, people feel safe and secure. We need a teched up 21st century version of Siena's vision of a good government, of a good city, of a place where we can live and where we can thrive. A moral political economy is all about flourishing. It's all about us being able to have dignity, meaning, and to thrive, and to survive, and to be supported. Frances Perkins remains in my head, I'm on my last one. Frances Perkins remains in my head and my heart. I may be a wonky academic, but I'm trying to do all I can to make sure we can forestall those disasters that we can foresee and to mitigate those we don't anticipate, which I think is very consistent with what the other two speakers were talking about. These are my great-grandnephews. I think you use either great or grand, but anyway, they're my sister's child's, my niece's kids. They're 4-year-old twins. And they are already, thanks to a mother with good values, working for a better world for refugee children, in fact, for all children. I want the world to be a place where they can thrive. They don't need to become professors, doctors, lawyers, technologists, or venture capitalists. But whatever they do, and I suspect it will be many different things over their hopefully very long lifetimes, we should all make sure it will bring them dignity and respect, as well as enable them to contribute to the collective good. Thank you.